The alarms blared through the corridors of the space station, their shrill wails echoing off the metal walls and drowning out the dying hum of the star they orbited. Commander Elena Reyes stumbled through the chaos, every step a battle against the violent shudders of the station. The floor beneath her feet vibrated with the unsettling rhythm of imminent catastrophe. "Seal off Section C," she shouted, her voice hoarse from the recycled air that tasted faintly of burnt circuitry. Her command cut through the noise, reaching the ears of her scattered crew. They moved with the frantic precision of those who understood they were already ghosts haunting a derelict station. It was supposed to be a joke, a harmless, stupid joke, a practice in the gallows humor that had kept them sane as they circled a star on the brink of its own grim demise. But this time, the punchline was a war, and the punch was a bioengineered plague, unleashed with a careless flick of a switch. "Captain, we've got breaches in the biolab containment," Lieutenant Alana Lee reported, her face appearing on a flickering monitor beside Reyes. Static distorted her features, making her look like a spectral warning from some dystopian future. "The pathogen is spreading faster than our protocols can handle." Reyes swore under her breath, her mind racing with the implications. The pathogen, a groaning beast born of genetic manipulation and creative despair, was designed to dissolve every living cell it touched. It had been a theoretical exercise, a dark joke among the scientists to pass the time and tempt fate. Now, it was very real and very deadly. How the hell did this happen? Reyes demanded, gripping the edge of a console to steady herself as the station jolted again, a testament to the failing integrity of their orbital home. "Someone initiated the sequence remotely," Lee replied, her voice taut with fear and disbelief. "We're trying to trace the signal, but it's bouncing across our network. It's as if someone... No, it looks like something wants us to fail." The implication was chilling. Not sabotage from within, but interference from something outside, a force watching, waiting, and perhaps laughing at their predicament. "Get me communications with Earth," Reyes ordered, grimacing at the futility of the command. They were light years away, and the station's communications array was as aged and unreliable as the dying star they orbited. "We lost contact an hour ago," Lee said, her image flickering out for a moment before snapping back into focus. "We're on our own." The words fell like a death knell. On their own, trapped in a tin can spinning around a dying sun, armed with a plague that could end this grim dance once and for all. Reyes turned, her eyes scanning the chaos around her. Scientists and engineers scurried past, their faces masks of fear and determination. She spotted Dr. Marcus Hale, the lead scientist on the project, his face pale as he worked furiously at a terminal. "Hale," she barked, striding over and grabbing his arm. "Have you got anything for me?" He looked up, eyes wide behind his glasses, reflecting the red emergency lights like an insect caught in a trap. "We've isolated the pathogen to sections C and D, but containment has failed. It's airborne now, and if it reaches the central ventilation system, it will spread station-wide." "Options?" Reyes asked, though she already knew the answer. There was only one, and it was as grim as their situation. "Evacuation," Hale said, confirming her fears. "We need to jettison the infected sections before they compromise the entire station." Reyes nodded, her heart pounding with the weight of the decision. "Get it done. Coordinate with Lee. I want those sections vented into space in 10 minutes. Hale nodded and sprinted back to his terminal, fingers flying across the keys as he relayed the orders. Reyes allowed herself a moment to watch him work, to see the calm efficiency of a man who knew his life depended on his actions. The station groaned beneath them, a monstrous complaint from a dying beast. Reyes reached for her comm, switching frequencies to address the entire station. "This is Commander Reyes," she announced, her voice steady despite the turmoil. "We're initiating emergency procedures. Sections C and D will be jettisoned in 10 minutes. All personnel in those areas must evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." The announcement echoed through the corridors, a grim reminder of the stakes. Reyes switched off the comm and turned back to the console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she monitored the evacuation. Minutes ticked by, each one a lifetime. Reyes watched the screens, seeing the dots representing her crew move towards safety. The red thread of the pathogen crept slowly behind them, an inevitable tide of destruction. "Commander," Lee's voice crackled through the intercom. "We're ready to vent the sections on your mark." Reyes took a deep breath, steadying herself for what needed to be done. Do it. There was a moment of silence, a lull in the chaos, and then the station shuddered violently as explosive bolts fired, severing the infected sections from their orbiting sanctuary. Reyes watched on the screen as sections C and D drifted away, tumbling into the void, taking the plague with them. The sense of relief was short-lived. The station's systems screamed again, this time with a different alert. Reyes watched in horror as the monitors flickered and changed, showing a new threat. "Commander, we're getting a power surge from the star," Hale shouted, his face pale as he read the data. "It's going to overload our systems. We need to shut down non-essential functions now." The dying star, in its final throes, was lashing out with flares of radiation and magnetic storms, a cosmic tantrum that threatened to finish what the pathogen had started. "Shut it all down," Reyes ordered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Redirect all power to shields and life support. We need to ride this out." The station's systems groaned as they shifted power, the lights flickering ominously. Reyes felt the temperature drop, the air growing thin and cold as the environmental controls powered down. "Lee, report," Reyes demanded, forcing herself to remain calm as the station trembled around her. "Shields are holding, but barely," Lee responded, her voice strained. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before the surge overwhelms us." 10 minutes. It seemed the universe had a sense of humor after all. Reyes clenched her fists, her mind racing for a solution. They needed to either outrun the storm or outlast it, and with the station's engines offline, only the latter was possible. "Suggestions?" she called out, her voice carrying through the command room. Silence answered her. The crew exchanged glances, their hope as tenuous as the station's integrity. Reyes scanned their faces, seeing the fear mirrored in their eyes. It was then that she saw Dr. Hale, his expression shifting from despair to a grim determination. "Commander, I have an idea," he said, stepping forward. "We could use the station's core to create a counterpulse, a sort of electromagnetic shield that might deflect the surge." Reyes considered, her mind racing through the possibilities. It was a long shot, but it was better than waiting for the end. "Do it," she ordered. "But be quick about it." Hale nodded and rushed to his station, his fingers a blur as he worked. Reyes watched him, feeling the seconds slip away. The station shuddered again, a reminder that their time was rapidly running out. "Core is primed," Hale announced, his voice tight with urgency. "Initiating pulse in 3, 2, 1. The station vibrated violently as the core released its energy, the electromagnetic pulse rippling outwards. The screens flickered, showing a brief flare of light as the star's surge collided with their makeshift shield. For a moment, the chaos paused, the air thick with anticipation. Then the lights stabilized, the alarms silenced, and the station settled into an uneasy calm. "We did it," Lee whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Reyes allowed herself a moment of relief, the tension in her muscles easing slightly. But she knew better than to celebrate too soon. They had survived the storm, but the aftermath awaited, and with it, the unanswered question of who, or what, had turned their joke into a weapon. "Get me a full systems check," Reyes ordered, her voice steady once more. "And I want that signal traced. We need to know who our real enemy is." As her crew set to work, Reyes stepped away from the command terminal, her mind turning over the possibilities. The plague, the sabotage, the star's rage, all of it pointed to an unseen hand guiding their fate. The monitor near her flickered, drawing her attention. A message blinked onto the screen, its source untraceable, its contents chilling in their simplicity. "Welcome to the endgame," it read. Reyes stared at the words, her mind grappling with the implications. This was no accident, no cosmic whimsy. They were pawns in a game far larger than themselves, and the joke was on them. As the reality settled over her, the station's lights flickered again, a reminder that their reprieve was temporary. Above all, one thought remained, a beacon in the uncertainty. They had to survive, if only to uncover the truth. Reyes turned back to her crew, her resolve hardening into steel. "Let's show them what humanity can do," she said, her voice a rallying cry in the void. "Let's turn their joke into our victory." The crew responded with renewed energy, their desperation transforming into determination. Reyes felt a spark of hope ignite within her, fueled by the knowledge that they were not yet defeated. The star outside continued its slow death, its light dimming as the station orbited in defiance. Their world had shrunk to this fragile metal shell, but within it, humanity's indomitable spirit burned bright. As the clock ticked onward, the unseen enemy watched, their laughter echoing in the void. But Reyes and her crew were ready, armed with nothing but their wits, their courage, and the unyielding resolve to survive against the odds. In the silence of space, the battle lines were drawn, and the game began anew. Sergeant Elena Morales tightened her grip on the cold steel rail of the observation deck as she surveyed the chaos below. The compound, once a bastion of scientific advancement, now teemed with the frenzied activity of people trying to contain a disaster of their own making. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning chemicals and the distant, haunting wails of the infected. "Elena, we have to go," insisted Dr. Liu, his voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. His lab coat flapped like a tattered flag in the wind. "This place is a lost cause." "Not yet," Elena replied, her eyes scanning the scene. "We need more time to get the non-essentials out." "Any word on the antidote?" Dr. Liu shook his head grimly. "The pathogen has mutated again. Whatever we had is now obsolete. We're back to square one." Elena cursed under her breath. The pathogen, initially intended for agricultural pest control, had been engineered to target specific genes in insects. But in the hubris of their success, the scientists had pushed the envelope, arrogantly believing they could control it. Now, it was leaping across species, jumping from insects to mammals, and leaving a trail of death in its wake. "Get to the evac site, Doctor. I'll handle things here," Elena said, her voice tinged with a determination that belied the sinking dread in her gut. She turned away from the deck and headed back into the heart of the facility, her senses immediately assaulted by the cacophony of urgent voices, clattering equipment, and the ever-present alarms. In the corridors, the signs of the rapidly escalating crisis were everywhere. Technicians huddled over consoles, desperately attempting to salvage critical data. Medics rushed past with stretchers, their faces set in expressions of grim resolve. And the infected, those poor souls who had been exposed to the mutating virus, were quarantined behind makeshift barriers, their eyes wide with terror as they succumbed to the pathogen's onslaught. Elena shouldered her way through the throng, her military training allowing her to maintain a veneer of calm despite the chaos. Her mind raced with contingencies and worst-case scenarios, each one more dire than the last. They needed to contain the outbreak, or the consequences would be unimaginable. As she reached the central command hub, she spotted Captain Hayes barking orders, his authoritative presence a rare constant amidst the turmoil. He was a hard man, forged in countless conflicts, and his leadership was the only thing holding the operation together. "Captain," Elena called out, drawing his attention. "Morales," he acknowledged, sparing her a brief glance. "Report." Dr. Liu confirmed the pathogen mutated again. "No antidote. We're evacuating civilians, but it's spreading too fast." Captain Hayes nodded, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "We got a team working on a new countermeasure, but it's a long shot. Too many unknowns." Elena hesitated, then asked the question she dreaded. "What about containment?" Hayes' jaw tightened. "We're deploying barriers, but if it breaches the perimeter, we're looking at a multi-state infection, minimum." The weight of his words settled heavily between them. The pathogen was no longer just a local threat, it was poised to become a global catastrophe. "Focus on the evacuation," Hayes ordered. "Get as many people out as you can. I'll coordinate with the CDC and military for a wider response." Elena nodded, turning on her heel to fulfill her orders. As she moved through the compound, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing battle. The pathogen was relentless, adapting faster than they could react. For every step forward, they were pushed 2 steps back. In the makeshift infirmary, she paused to check on the injured. The room was a flurry of activity, with medics administering aid as best they could. She spotted a young soldier, Private Thompson, sitting on a cot with a bandaged arm, his face ashen. "Private, what happened?" she asked, crouching beside him. "Got scratched during the first breach," he said, wincing as a medic tightened his bandage. "Feels like hell, but all alive." Elena studied him, noting the pallor of his skin and the glassiness in his eyes. She knew the signs all too well. "Get him isolated," she instructed the medic. "He might be infected." Thompson's eyes widened with fear, but he nodded, recognizing the reality of the situation. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Leaving the infirmary, Elena felt the weight of each life depending on her decisions. The enemy they faced was insidious, invisible, and growing stronger by the moment. As she moved toward the evac site, her radio crackled to life. "Sergeant Morales, this is Delta Team. We've got a situation at the North Perimeter. Requesting immediate backup." Elena's heart sank. The North Perimeter was where they had concentrated their defenses, hoping to stem the spread of infection. "On my way," she replied, sprinting toward the breach. The scene that greeted her was one of utter devastation. The barricades had been torn down, and the infected swarmed like a tide of madness and despair. Soldiers fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered, and the pathogen was relentless. "Fall back," Elena shouted, firing her weapon into the oncoming horde. "Regroup at the secondary line." As she fought her way through the chaos, time seemed to blur, each second stretching into an eternity of violence and desperation. Around her, the screams of the dying mingled with the guttural cries of the infected, creating a symphony of horror that threatened to overwhelm her senses. But Elena was no stranger to impossible odds. Her training kicked in, her actions becoming a blur of practiced efficiency. She directed the retreat, her voice cutting through the din as she coordinated with the remaining soldiers. "Captain Hayes, North Perimeter is compromised. We need reinforcements, now. Hold the line, Morales." His voice crackled through the radio, edged with urgency. "We're redirecting all available units to your position." Even as Elena fought to maintain the perimeter, she couldn't shake the nagging sense of futility. The pathogen was everywhere, insidious and unstoppable, and they were merely delaying the inevitable. Then, through the chaos, she saw them, the figures moving with a purpose that set them apart from the frantic throngs around them. Clad in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks, they moved with a precision that spoke of lethal training. They were not part of her unit. "Elena, watch out," a voice shouted, too late. The first explosion rocked the ground, and the world became a maelstrom of fire and debris. Elena was thrown back, her vision swimming as she struggled to regain her bearings. The newcomers had brought explosives, and they were cutting through the compound's defenses with ruthless efficiency. As she staggered to her feet, she saw one of them, a tall figure with an air of command, surveying the destruction with cold detachment. There was no mistaking the calculated intent in those eyes. These were not opportunists or looters, they were here with a purpose. "Who the hell are you?" Elena demanded, raising her weapon. The figure turned, regarding her with a chilling calm. "Just cleaning up your mess, Sergeant," he replied, his voice a low rasp. Before Elena could respond, a second explosion ripped through the air, and the world faded to black. When consciousness returned, it came with the sharp tang of antiseptic and the muted hum of machinery. Elena blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, the events of the perimeter assault flooding back in a disjointed rush. "You're awake," a voice said, drawing her attention. Dr. Liu stood at her bedside, his expression a mixture of relief and grim resolve. "We thought we lost you." "What happened?" Elena croaked, her throat dry and raw. "Your perimeter was breached. A paramilitary group, unknown origin. They hit several key facilities simultaneously. We think they're after the pathogen." Elena's heart sank. Why would anyone want this? "It's uncontrollable." Liu hesitated, then said, "Not if you have the means to control it. We believe they have a stabilizing agent. If they succeed, they could weaponize the pathogen, target specific populations." The implications were staggering. Elena struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain that flared through her body. "We have to stop them." Liu nodded. "Captain Hayes is already forming a response team. He wants you as part of it." Despite the dire circumstances, Elena felt a flicker of determination. They might be against impossible odds, but she wasn't about to back down. Not now, when so much was at stake. As Dr. Liu briefed her on the mission, Elena's mind raced with possibilities and plans. They would need to act swiftly, decisively, and with every ounce of cunning they could muster. The enemy had shown their hand, but the game was far from over. The fate of humanity might rest on the edge of a knife, but Elena Morales was not about to let it tip without a fight. The command center buzzed with activity, a hive of coordinated effort as plans were drawn and contingencies debated. Elena joined Captain Hayes at the central console, where a tactical map displayed the latest intelligence. "We've tracked the paramilitary group to a facility in the desert," Hayes said, gesturing to the map. Intel suggests they're using it as a base of operations for further attacks. Any idea who they are? Elena asked, scanning the map for weaknesses. Best guess? A rogue faction using the chaos to further their own ends, Hayes replied. We're not sure who's backing them, but they have resources. And we have to assume they have the stabilizing agent, Elena added, her mind working through the implications. If they perfect it, they could unleash a targeted pandemic, Hayes finished grimly. We can't let that happen. Elena nodded, her resolve hardening. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was not an option. What's our plan? Hayes outlined the assault, his voice steady and sure. We'll hit them hard and fast, disrupt their operations before they can proceed. You'll lead the ground team, disable their defenses, and retrieve any intel on the stabilizing agent. It was a daunting task, fraught with risks and unknowns. But as Elena prepared to lead the charge, she felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. This was what she was trained for, what she lived for. As the team assembled, each member a seasoned operative with the resolve born of countless battles, Elena felt a surge of pride. They were the best, and together, they would take the fight to the enemy. Listen up, she addressed the team, her voice carrying the weight of authority. We've got a job to do, and a world to save. We hit them fast, hit them hard, and we don't stop until the threat is neutralized. Understood? A chorus of affirmations greeted her, each one a promise of commitment and resolve. As they moved to the waiting transport, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The pathogen was a harbinger of worse to come, a harbinger of chaos and destruction. But for now, they had a chance to fight back, to reclaim control from those who would see it torn away. And fight they would, with every resource at their disposal, every ounce of strength they could muster. The world was on the brink, but humanity was not about to go quietly into the night. As the transport roared to life, carrying them toward an uncertain future, Elena Morales steeled herself for the battle ahead. It was time to turn the tide, and she was ready to lead the charge. The dim glow of the monitor cast a sickly pallor over Captain Dana Reeves' features. She thumbed through the endless streams of data flooding in from every corner of the solar system. It didn't matter how much information poured in, the core of the truth remained unyielding and grim. The joke, as it was once humorously called, had spiraled into a full-blown interstellar crisis, and humanity found itself woefully outmatched. It all started with the Jovian Accords annual summit, a gathering intended to showcase unity among the galaxy's diverse sentient species. In a careless moment, a human diplomat, leaning too heavily into cultural satire, had made an offhand comment about the Rylok's aversion to carbon-based life forms. To humans, it was a jest, a bit of lighthearted teasing, but to the Rylok, it was an affront of the highest order. Unfortunately, their response was not a diplomatic protest but the unleashing of a bioengineered plague, a pathogen designed with surgical precision to exploit the vulnerabilities of Earth's biosphere. Now, Earth's cities were hushed under quarantine zones. The skies, once filled with bustling aircraft, were eerily silent save for the occasional military drone whirring overhead. Reeve watched as the latest transmission showed the outbreak's spread, red splotches blossoming on the digital map like sores. Every new report was a reminder of their inadequacy against the Rylok's biotechnological superiority. Reeve's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of an urgent message. She opened it, revealing the grim visage of Dr. Aaron Park, the lead scientist at the emergency research facility orbiting the moon. His usual composed demeanor was replaced by lines of stress etched deep into his brow. "We're close to a breakthrough, Captain," Park said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But the pathogen is evolving faster than we can analyze. It's like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Give me something, Aaron," Reeve implored. Her voice was a tightrope of desperation and command. "Anything. We can't keep losing ground like this." Park sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "We've identified a potential inhibitor in the pathogen's replication process, but scaling it for mass production is ambitious at best. The Rylok crafted it to adapt, to anticipate our every countermeasure." Reeve leaned back, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. They were attempting to fight an enemy who had planned for every contingency, and humanity's resources were stretched to the breaking point. Down on Earth, the mood was equally tense. Sergeant Li Chen stood on the rooftops of a deserted skyscraper in New York, overseeing the evacuation of another district. The wind whipped through the empty streets below, carrying the scent of fear and isolation. His squad was one of the few remaining tasked with maintaining order and ensuring the safety of those left behind. His comms crackled to life, and the voice of Private Maria Sanchez broke through the static. "Sir, we've got a situation down here. Civilians refusing to leave the area. They're saying it's safer to stay put than risk the transport zones." Lee cursed under his breath. "On my way, Sanchez. Keep them calm until I get there." Descending the staircase 2 steps at a time, Lee tried to ignore the gnawing sense of futility. Every day was a new struggle against denial, panic, and despair. Yet, there was a stubborn resilience in humanity that refused to be extinguished. It was something he clung to, even as the odds stacked higher against them. When he reached the street, he found a small crowd gathered, their faces a mix of defiance and fear. Sanchez stood at the forefront, her hand resting on her holster, a silent message of authority tempered with caution. "Listen up, folks," Lee addressed them, his voice steady. "I get it. I know you're scared, and I know it feels like we're asking you to trade one danger for another. But staying here isn't an option. We've got a plan in place to get you to safety." A woman stepped forward, arms crossed over her chest. "Safety? Where's safe when the whole damn planet is under siege? They say the transport zones are just as bad as the cities, maybe worse." Lee held her gaze, searching for a spark of understanding. "I won't lie to you. It's rough everywhere, but we're doing everything we can. If we're going to have any chance of beating this thing, we need to stay together. We need to move as one." The woman wavered, her bravado crumbling under the weight of reality. Defeat lingered in her eyes, but finally, she nodded. One by one, the crowd relented, their feet dragging as they began to follow Sanchez to the evac point. As Lee watched them go, he felt the burden of their lives settle on his shoulders. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was herding them into the unknown, where hope was nothing more than a flickering candle in a storm. Meanwhile, back on the moon, Dr. Park was having his own crisis. The lab buzzed with a frenetic energy as scientists dashed between workstations, their movements a dance of controlled chaos. Park hovered over the main console, eyes locked on the analysis results scrolling across the screen. A young researcher, Dr. Yara Mehta, approached, her expression a blend of excitement and trepidation. "Dr. Park, we've managed to stabilize the inhibitor in a controlled setting. If we can get it to the planet, we might be able to slow the pathogen's spread." Park's heart leapt at the news, but his mind was quick to remind him of the hurdles that lay ahead. "And the delivery system?" Yara hesitated. "That's the problem. We need a way to distribute it on a massive scale, and fast. Otherwise, the mutation rate will outpace us once again." The weight of their predicament settled over Park like a shroud. They were racing against a clock that refused to slow, and every tick was a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. But even in the depths of despair, there was a flicker of human ingenuity, a stubborn refusal to surrender. It was this spark that kept Park going, that drove him to push the boundaries of what was possible. Hours turned into days, and the situation grew increasingly dire. Reports from the evacuation zones were grim. The pathogen had begun to evolve in unexpected ways, targeting not just humans but the very ecosystems that sustained them. Infrastructure crumbled under the strain, and the once vibrant cities became ghostly echoes of their former selves. Yet, amidst the chaos, alliances were forged and tested. Reeve and Park found themselves in frequent communication, their conversations a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. They were kindred spirits, united by a shared determination to reclaim their world, even as the odds stacked higher against them. In one particularly bleak moment, Reeve confided in Park, her voice tinged with a vulnerability she rarely allowed. "Do you ever wonder if we're just delaying the inevitable? If all our efforts are just futile?" Park paused, the question hanging heavy between them. "I think about it every day," he admitted. "But then I remember that humanity has faced impossible odds before. We're stubborn, if nothing else. And sometimes, that's enough." The words offered little in the way of comfort, yet they carried a truth that resonated deep within Reeve. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared resolve. As time slipped through their fingers, whispers of a potential breakthrough began to circulate. A group of scientists, buried deep in the archives of Earth's forgotten history, stumbled upon an ancient technique, a method of genetic manipulation that could potentially turn the tide. The discovery was a gamble, a last-ditch effort in a game where the stakes were all or nothing. But it was a chance, and in the face of extinction, even the slimmest glimmer of hope was enough to ignite a fire within the human spirit. In a hastily convened meeting, Reeve laid out the plan to her team. "We have one shot at this," she warned, her tone grave yet unyielding. "If it fails, we lose everything. But if it works..." Her words trailed off, but the implication was clear. It was a gamble, a desperate bid for survival against an enemy that had proven its superiority time and again. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Reeve lingered, staring out at the endless expanse of space beyond the station's windows. The stars seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of their struggle. Yet, there was an undeniable beauty in it, a reminder that even in the face of insurmountable odds, there was something worth fighting for. And as long as there was a chance, no matter how slim, humanity would continue to fight. In the days that followed, the world held its breath. The plan was set in motion, and all they could do was wait and hope. For Lee, Sanchez, Park, and Reeve, the waiting was a torment, a liminal space where fear and hope warred for dominance. As the moment of reckoning approached, Reeve found herself standing alone on the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the blue marble of Earth. It was a sight that filled her with both pride and sorrow, a reminder of all they stood to lose. In those final moments, she thought of the countless lives hanging in the balance, of the legacy they fought to preserve. And she knew, deep in her heart, that no matter the outcome, humanity would endure. Because it had to, because they were more than just a species, they were a force of nature, resilient and unyielding. And as the countdown began, Reeve whispered a silent promise to the stars, a vow that echoed in the hearts of all those who dared to dream of a future beyond the darkness. The sterile hum of the containment chamber was a constant reminder of the stakes at play. It was a sound that hung heavy in the air, like a prescient whisper of the chaos that the bioengineered plague had unleashed upon the world. A sound that had accompanied Dr. Elise Grant and her ragtag team of survivors for the better part of a year now, as they struggled to find a way to outmaneuver a pathogen that seemed almost sentient in its relentless pursuit of humanity's final chapter. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Rest came in fleeting intervals between the endless analysis of genome sequences and desperate attempts to synthesize an antidote. They were close, she could feel it, but the virus was always one step ahead, mutating just enough to render their efforts futile. "Dr. Grant," a voice crackled through the intercom, jarring her from her thoughts. "We've got a situation in Sector 7. Elisa's heart sank. Sector 7 housed one of their largest remaining human settlements. If the plague had reached there, it could mean the end of yet another bastion of hope. She rushed to the control room, the echoes of her footsteps in the deserted corridors a grim reminder of the cost already paid. "Report," she demanded upon arrival. James, her second in command, pointed to the monitors. "We're seeing rapid infection rates, faster than anything we've encountered before. It's like the virus has adapted to spread more efficiently in the colder climates." Elise clenched her fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. The virus was learning, adapting in ways they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just changing biologically, it was evolving strategically, exploiting environmental weaknesses they hadn't considered. "We need to get a team out there, gather samples, and see what we're up against," she said, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Already assembling a crew," James replied, his tone a mixture of weariness and determination. "But there's something else. We've intercepted communications from the consortium. They're claiming they have a cure." Her blood ran cold. The consortium, an amalgam of corporate interests that had profited from the devastation, had been a thorn in their side from the beginning. They'd promised cures before, only to offer false hope in exchange for power and control. "Of course they do," Elise spat bitterly. "And they'll want something in return, won't they?" James nodded. "They're demanding total allegiance from the remaining settlements. They want to be the de facto government once this is all over." Elise swore under her breath. The consortium was nothing if not opportunistic, exploiting every crisis to tighten their stranglehold on what was left of the world. But she knew they were bluffing. The only thing they had was propaganda, designed to sow discord and desperation. "We'll deal with them later. For now, we focus on Sector 7, she said, though the weight of the decision felt like a noose tightening around her neck. As the team prepared to leave for Sector 7, Elise took a moment to reflect on the personal conflicts that simmered beneath the surface. Tensions were high, with resources dwindling and emotions frayed. Trust was a fragile commodity, stretched thin by months of living on the edge. She thought of Dr. Anwar, whose quiet resolve had been a source of strength in the darkest times. He'd lost his family to the plague, yet he continued to fight, driven by a need for retribution and redemption. But lately, Elise had sensed a growing distance between them, a shadow of doubt that loomed larger with each setback. "Anwar, you're with me on this one," Elise said, catching him as he prepared the medical supplies. He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "Are you sure that's wise? Maybe I should stay behind, work on the pathogen's latest mutation." "I need your expertise in the field," she replied, though she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Besides, we could use the moral support out there." He gave a reluctant nod, and together they joined the team as they boarded the transport vehicle. As it rumbled to life, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into a trap, the consortium's shadowy influence ever present, waiting to pounce. The journey to Sector 7 was tense, the silence punctuated by the occasional cough or shuffle of feet. They arrived to a scene of chaos, the settlement a patchwork of makeshift shelters and hastily erected barricades. People moved like ghosts through the streets, their faces hollow with fear and resignation. Elise and Anwar immediately set to work, gathering samples and assessing the infected. The virus had mutated to thrive in the cold, its symptoms more aggressive and lethal. The realization was a gut punch, the threat of extinction more palpable than ever. As they worked, a group of consortium agents arrived, their presence a stark reminder of the power struggles at play. Clad in sleek, black uniforms, they moved with an air of authority, their leader, a smirking man named Carter, approaching Elise with an arrogant swagger. "Dr. Grant, I presume," he said, his voice oozing with condescension. "I trust you've heard about our little miracle cure?" Elise bristled, her suspicions confirmed. "We know you don't have a cure, Carter. Just more lies to keep people under your thumb." Carter chuckled, unfazed by her defiance. "Believe what you will, but desperate times call for desperate measures. People will follow the one who offers hope, even if it's illusory." It was a veiled threat, one Elise knew she couldn't ignore. The consortium's influence was growing, feeding on the despair that permeated the settlements. As night fell, Elise gathered her team to discuss their next move. They were exhausted, their faces etched with fatigue and worry. Anwar spoke first, his voice tinged with frustration. "We can't keep playing catch-up like this. We need to take a different approach, anticipate the virus's next move." Elise nodded, though the answer eluded her. They'd been reactive for too long, always on the back foot. The virus seemed to be reading their playbook, countering every move with terrifying precision. "We need to think outside the box," she said, her mind racing. "Find a way to outsmart it, use its adaptability against it." The idea was vague, but it sparked something within the group, a flicker of hope, however tenuous. They began brainstorming, drawing on their diverse backgrounds and experiences. It was a testament to human ingenuity, their ability to adapt and innovate even in the face of annihilation. But as the night wore on, the reality of their situation became painfully clear. The virus was winning, and with each passing day, the consortium tightened its grip. Elise felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the burden of leadership more crushing than ever. In a moment of solitude, she found herself staring at the stars, wondering if the darkness would ever lift. The night was silent, save for the distant rumble of thunder, a storm brewing on the horizon, a harbinger of the trials yet to come. The next morning, Elise and her team made a breakthrough. By analyzing the virus's mutation patterns, they identified a potential vulnerability in its genetic makeup, a chink in its armor that could be exploited. It was a risky gambit, but it was all they had. They returned to the lab, a sense of urgency propelling them forward. The consortium was closing in, their promises of a cure luring more settlements into their fold. Elise knew that time was running out, and the stakes had never been higher. But just as they began to make progress, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the containment chamber, the flames consuming their samples and equipment with a voracious hunger. Panic ensued, the team scrambling to contain the inferno before it spread. Elise watched in horror as months of work went up in smoke, the lab a charred ruin. It was a devastating blow, the loss cutting deeper than she could have imagined. The consortium seized the opportunity to tighten their grip, their agents descending upon the settlement with promises of salvation. Carter was there, his smirk more pronounced than ever as he offered Elise a deal, one that would secure her people's future at the cost of their freedom. Elise was at a crossroads, her faith in humanity's resilience tested to its limits. The fire had left them with nothing, their chances of survival dwindling by the hour. Yet, even in the depths of despair, she couldn't bring herself to capitulate. As the consortium's ultimatum loomed, Elise and her team faced their darkest moment. But there was something indomitable about the human spirit, a tenacity that refused to be extinguished. With the fate of the world hanging in the balance, Elise knew that the time had come to make a choice, a decision that would either save them or doom them all. It was a gamble, but it was one they had to take, for there was no other way forward. In that moment, surrounded by the ashes of their efforts and the looming shadow of the consortium, Elise realized what truly set humanity apart: their capacity to hope, even when all seemed lost. In the face of annihilation, they would stand together, not because they were certain of victory, but because they believed in the possibility of it. The sky was an ominous shade of gray, a sickly hue that seemed to mirror the malaise gripping humanity. It was as though nature itself had conspired to reflect the despair on Earth. The streets of every major city lay abandoned, debris scattered like forgotten memories. The air felt heavy, a silent testament to the plague that had ravaged the world. Humanity was on its knees. The bioengineered virus, designed with insidious precision by an unknown hand, had spread faster than any natural disease could. It attacked without mercy, morphing and adapting with a malevolent intelligence. The first wave had targeted the immune system, reducing it to rubble, while subsequent mutations aimed at the nervous system, leaving survivors in a state of perpetual agony. The world was a sepulchre. Governments had collapsed, order had disintegrated, and the handful of remaining enclaves were little more than shadows of their former selves. People had retreated into themselves, each day a struggle to survive, each breath a reminder of the fragility of life. Yet, amidst the ruins, the indomitable human spirit flickered, refusing to be extinguished. In the remnants of what was once New York City, a small group of survivors clung to life in the underground tunnels. They called themselves The Last Stand, a name that was both ironic and aspirational. Their leader, a grizzled former biologist named Dr. Alex Monroe, had taken up the mantle reluctantly, driven less by hope and more by a stubborn refusal to simply fade away. "All right. Listen up," Alex announced to the group, his voice raspy from the dust and smoke that perpetually lingered in the air. "We've got a lead on a potential weak point in the virus's structure. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." The group was small, barely 20 souls, but they were resolute. Among them was Claire, a former nurse whose hands were now rough and scarred, and Sam, a young tech wizard who had once dreamed of Silicon Valley glory but now used his skills to salvage whatever scraps of technology he could find. "Are we really going to pin our hopes on another long shot?" Claire's voice cut through the murmur of the group, weary yet defiant. "We've been down this road before." "I know," Alex replied, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of resolve and desperation. "But this time we might have an edge. We've managed to hack into some old satellite data. There's a facility in Greenland, one of the labs that might have been involved in creating this plague. It's been dark since the outbreak, but there are signs of activity." Sam adjusted his glasses, which had become more necessity than fashion statement. "We're talking about getting to Greenland? Alex, half of us can barely make it across the city without getting picked off by raiders or succumbing to the sickness." "I'm aware of the risks," Alex continued, his voice steady. "But if there's even a sliver of a chance that we can find something, anything, to fight back, we have to take it. We owe it to the ones we've lost." Silence fell over the group, the weight of the decision palpable. Finally, it was Claire who spoke, her voice carrying a note of hope that hadn't been heard in months. "All right then, let's do it. What's the plan?" Alex exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "We move out tonight. We'll head to the old airstrip north of the city. If Sam can get the Cessna operational, we'll fly to Greenland." "Big if," Sam muttered, but there was a spark in his eyes now. It was the first time in too long that they were doing something other than merely surviving. The day passed in a blur of preparation, scavenging for supplies, and calculating risks. As night fell, The group emerged from the tunnels like specters, moving silently through the skeletal remains of the city. The airstrip was located in what had once been a bustling suburb, now overgrown and eerily silent. The Cessna was a relic from a bygone era, its once shiny exterior now mottled with rust and neglect. Sam set to work immediately, his fingers nimble and sure despite the cold that nipped at their extremities. As he worked, the others kept watch, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. "Got it," Sam exclaimed, his voice carrying a note of triumph that was infectious. The plane sputtered to life, its engine a roar of defiance against the silence of the night. The flight was rough, the turbulence a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. But as they soared above the desolate landscape, there was a sense of camaraderie that transcended words, a shared understanding that, despite everything, they were still here, still fighting. When they finally touched down on the icy expanse of Greenland, the sun was a pale orb on the horizon, casting long shadows over the snow. The lab was not hard to find, a concrete monolith jutting from the landscape, its windows dark and foreboding. The group approached cautiously, weapons drawn, senses heightened. The front entrance was ajar, as though inviting them in. Inside, the air was frigid, their breath visible in the dim light. The facility appeared abandoned, yet there was a sense of something lingering, an unseen presence that set their nerves on edge. "Stay close," Alex whispered, leading them deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. Every door they passed bore the scars of the chaos that had unfolded here, but there were no signs of life. No movement, no sound save for their footsteps echoing in the silence. It was in the lab's central chamber that they found what they were looking for. A massive server bank stood against one wall, lights blinking in a steady rhythm that seemed almost mocking. Sam hurried forward, his fingers dancing over the keyboard, eyes scanning the data that unfolded before him. "What do you see?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's amazing," Sam replied, awe creeping into his tone. "It's all here, the original virus schematics, the mutations, everything. It's like they were tracking it, studying it. There's data on a potential countermeasure, something they were working on." "Can you get it?" Alex asked, urgency tinging his voice. "I think so, but it's going to take time. I need to decrypt these files, and that's not going to be easy." "Do what you can," Alex instructed, casting a wary glance around. "We'll hold here as long as we can, but we need to be ready to move." Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last, tension mounting with each tick of the clock. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful dirge that seemed to promise nothing but oblivion. And yet, within the group, there was a newfound sense of purpose, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they had found the key to turning the tide. It was Sam's exclamation that broke the silence, his voice a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "I've got it. I've decrypted the files. There's a formula here. Something designed to trigger a reaction in the virus, to destabilize it at a molecular level." "Can we replicate it?" Claire asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. "I think so," Sam nodded, his confidence growing. "But we'll need equipment, labs, materials. We can't do this here." Alex nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll have to get back, find a way to produce it on a larger scale. This could be our chance." But as they prepared to leave, the facility's alarms pierced the air, a shrill warning that echoed through the corridors. The group froze, hearts pounding, the reality of their situation crashing down like a tidal wave. "We've been detected," Alex hissed, eyes scanning for threats. "We need to move, now." They raced through the corridors, adrenaline fueling their steps, desperation driving them forward. Outside, the wind had picked up, a howling gale that threatened to swallow them whole. But they pushed on, driven by the flickering flame of hope and the knowledge that they carried the fate of humanity in their hands. As they reached the plain, the sky above was ominously silent, yet there was a palpable sense of impending doom. They knew that whoever, or whatever, had created this plague would not take kindly to their interference. "Everyone in," Alex shouted over the wind, helping the others into the Cessna. Sam, the last to board, paused, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. "They'll come for us," he said, his voice filled with the grim certainty of someone who understood the stakes. "Let them," Alex replied, his voice a low growl. "As long as we have this data, we've got a fighting chance. And that's more than we had yesterday." The plane roared to life, its ascent a defiant scream against the storm. As they soared into the night, the world lay spread out below them, a shattered canvas in desperate need of healing. And yet, amidst the darkness, there was a glimmer of light, a fragile, flickering promise that humanity was not done fighting. Not yet. The air was thick with fear and the pungent smell of antiseptic as the quarantine facility hummed with activity. It was a grim ballet of human suffering and the relentless march of science. The bioengineered plague, meticulously crafted to bypass the robust defenses of the human immune system, had spread with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The architects of this calamity, a shadowy consortium of extraterrestrial intelligences, watched with clinical detachment from their hidden vantage points. Humanity, they had calculated, would crumble swiftly under the weight of their own frailty. But then, as the universe often delights in mocking the hubris of those who claim omniscience, the first whispers of resistance began to ripple across the globe. In a dimly lit laboratory buried beneath layers of concrete and secrecy, Dr. Janet Hargrove stared at the data on her screen with a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning hope. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, eyes scanning the results again and again. The numbers didn't lie. Against all odds, there was a small but significant faction of the human population exhibiting natural resistance to the virus. It wasn't a full immunity, not yet, but it was a foothold, a starting point that could be leveraged. "What have you found, Janet?" Dr. Amir Patel asked, appearing beside her, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the oppressive hush of the lab. Janet looked up, her eyes alight with a fire that had been absent for weeks. "It's there, Amir. Some of us are fighting back. The virus isn't invincible." Amir's eyebrows rose in cautious optimism. "How many?" "Enough," she replied, the word laden with possibility. "Enough to make a difference if we can harness it." Elsewhere, in the sterile corridors of power, the realization was dawning among the orchestrators of this calamity that perhaps they had miscalculated. Reports of human resilience, ingenuity, and that inexplicable drive to survive against all odds were filtering through their networks. The initial confidence that had accompanied the release of their viral masterpiece was beginning to erode, replaced by a simmering unease. In the heart of a hemorrhaging city, where the streets had been transformed into a tapestry of chaos and desperation, a different kind of battle was unfolding. Groups of survivors, seemingly ordinary people pushed to the brink, were banding together in acts of defiant solidarity. Makeshift clinics sprouted in basements and abandoned storefronts, staffed by volunteers who had once been accountants, teachers, and baristas. Armed with little more than determination and whatever medical supplies they could scavenge, they began testing, treating, and organizing. It was in one such clinic that a young nurse, Emily Chen, stumbled upon a peculiar pattern. She had been meticulously cataloging patient responses to the infection, and a thought had taken seed in her mind: the possibility that certain environmental factors might be playing a role in the resistance some were exhibiting. It was a theory born of desperation and perhaps a touch of madness, but in this new world, madness and genius were often indistinguishable. "Emily, are you seeing this?" Her colleague, a grizzled paramedic named Jake, leaned over her shoulder, his voice hoarse from shouting over the din of misery that filled the clinic. She nodded, her fingers tracing over the notes scribbled in a battered notebook. "I think there's something in the air here, Jake. Something that's helping people fight back." Jake grunted, the skepticism evident in the furrow of his brow. "You think the air's different here than anywhere else?" "Not everywhere," Emily countered, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Just some places, like here. I've been tracking the cases, and it's more than coincidence." "All right," Jake said, drawing out the word as if tasting it. "How do we use that?" Emily paused, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "We need to test it, replicate it. But first, we need samples." Meanwhile, the extraterrestrial architects of this nightmare were beginning to feel the sting of their own arrogance. Surveillance drones and data feeds were painting a picture they had not anticipated. Humanity was not collapsing into chaos as swiftly as projected. Instead, they were adapting, evolving, and, most alarmingly, organizing. In a hastily convened meeting, a council of these alien masterminds debated their next move. Their avatars flickered across holographic screens, their voices a chorus of dissonant tones. "We underestimated them," one stated, its frustration a palpable undercurrent. "Their capacity for adaptation is greater than anticipated." Another chimed in, its voice tinged with grudging admiration. It is the nature of these bipeds. Their unpredictability is their strength. Then we must escalate, a third interjected, its tone cold and calculating. We cannot allow them to regain control. Back on Earth, the tide was shifting. Laboratories, like the one where Janet and Amir toiled, became hubs of frenetic activity. Communication lines buzzed with shared data, discoveries, and theories. The human network, disparate and fragmented, began to knit itself together in a patchwork of collaboration and innovation. Janet and Amir, driven by the urgency of their newfound hope, worked day and night, synthesizing a potential countermeasure that drew upon the latent resistance. It was a gamble, but with each passing hour, their confidence grew. As they prepared for the first trial, Janet looked at Amir, her voice steady despite the whirlwind around them. "This is it, Amir. We either make history or we become it." He nodded, the weight of their task a shared burden. "Let's show them what we're made of." And so, with a simple injection, the trial began. The patient, a volunteer from among the naturally resistant, took a deep breath as the needle pierced his skin. It was a moment charged with 1,000 possibilities, each more terrifying and exhilarating than the last. Time slowed, the seconds stretching into an eternity as they watched for any sign of success or failure. When the monitors finally beeped their approval, a cheer erupted, a sound that echoed through the sterile halls like a battle cry. Across the globe, similar scenes played out as humanity's response began to coalesce into something formidable. In the cities, the makeshift clinics became centers of hope, their walls plastered with makeshift posters and hastily scrawled messages of encouragement. Emily and Jake, armed with their air samples and an iron will, began to see results. The air in certain locations, they discovered, contained trace elements that seemed to bolster the immune response. It was a revelation that spread like wildfire, igniting a frenzy of innovation. Filtration systems were rigged together from scavenged parts, and strategies were devised to replicate the conditions that had given rise to this unexpected boon. Humanity, it seemed, was finding its footing. The Extraterrestrial Council, meanwhile, watched as their carefully laid plans began to unravel. The image of humanity as a fragile, helpless species was being shattered by the very thing they had most underestimated, the relentless, indomitable spirit that drove them to overcome even the direst of circumstances. Their calculations, once pristine and unassailable, were now riddled with uncertainty. For the first time, they found themselves on the defensive, struggling to adapt to a foe that refused to be vanquished. In the weeks that followed, the momentum continued to build. The human resistance, once a flicker, had become a blaze. Armed with newfound knowledge and an unyielding resolve, they began to turn the tide, reclaiming territory once thought lost and pushing back against the viral onslaught. At the heart of this resurgence, Janet, Amir, Emily, Jake, and countless others worked tirelessly, each success a testament to the power of human ingenuity and perseverance. They were scientists, medics, and ordinary people transformed by extraordinary circumstances. And as the sun set on another day of hard-won victories, the world began to glimpse a future that had once seemed impossible. The architects of humanity's despair, those unseen manipulators and their bioengineered monstrosity, were learning a harsh lesson in humility. Humanity, with all its flaws and contradictions, was proving itself far more resilient than any algorithm could predict. In the end, it was the very thing the architects had dismissed that became their undoing. Humanity's unpredictability, their refusal to submit, and their ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds turned the tide of battle. The plague, once thought to be the instrument of humanity's destruction, was becoming a catalyst for their rebirth. As the world stood on the precipice of an uncertain tomorrow, one truth emerged with crystalline clarity: humans, those tenacious creatures of Earth, were not to be underestimated. Their story was far from over, and those who had sought to write its end would soon find themselves part of a narrative they could neither control nor comprehend. And so, with the stage set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of two worlds, humanity stood ready. Not as victims, but as victors in the making, armed with the knowledge that their greatest strength lay not in their technology or their science, but in the indomitable spirit that had carried them through the darkest hours of their existence. The Zelnar Confederacy hadn't counted on human resilience when they unleashed their bioengineered plague. From the moment the first spores fell gently from the sky like an alien pollen, the Confederacy had assumed triumph was inevitable. Their advanced bioengineering had been honed over millennia, and countless worlds had succumbed to their invisible hand of death. Humanity was meant to be another footnote in their expanding empire, a species too young and arrogant to realize they had no chance against such sophisticated biological warfare. But the Zelnar had not accounted for one essential element, the unrelenting audacity of the human spirit. When the plague spread across the continents, it did so with an initial ferocity that seemed unstoppable. Hospitals were overwhelmed, nations scrambled to respond, and panic spread faster than the disease itself. To the Zelnar, it was a beautiful orchestration of chaos. But amidst this turmoil, humanity did not crumble. Instead, it adapted, evolved, and fought back with a tenacity that left the Zelnar baffled. Dr. Alara Thompson stood at the heart of this rebellion, in a lab deep beneath the surface of what was once New York City. Her eyes flickered with determination as she scrolled through complex models and data streams projected in front of her, hands moving swiftly over the holographic interface. She was the lead researcher on the task force formed when the first signs of the outbreak were detected. Her team comprised the finest minds humanity had to offer, drawn from every corner of the globe. Mathematicians, geneticists, virologists, engineers, all brought together to face an enemy that had already taken billions of lives. "Team, listen up," Alara called out, her voice echoing through the sterile, bustling lab. "We need to focus on the protein folding simulations. I think we've finally cracked the Zelnar sequencing, but we need to confirm the folding mechanisms to counteract the pathogen's adaptive capabilities." Her team nodded, a chorus of "on it" and "got it" punctuating the air. There was little time for rest, and any delay could mean countless more lives lost. The Zelnar plague was designed to adapt to human medical interventions, changing its structure faster than conventional methods could keep up. But humanity had always thrived on challenges. As the simulations ran, Alara's mind wandered briefly to her family. She hadn't seen them in months, not since the outbreak began. For a fleeting moment, she imagined them safe and healthy, a fantasy she clung to as her motivation. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. There was work to be done, and sentimentality had no place in the laboratory. The Zelnar watched from their distant vessels, eagerly awaiting humanity's collapse. To them, Earth was a laboratory of their own, and humanity, nothing more than an experiment. Their arrogance was boundless, rooted in their ancient success over lesser species. But their hubris blinded them to the one variable they could never compute: human ingenuity. The hours turned into days, and the team's progress was relentless. The simulations were yielding promising results. They had identified a unique anomaly in the Zelnar genetic structure, a vulnerability hidden beneath layers of sophistication. It was a chink in the armor so minuscule that only the relentless, obsessive examination by human minds could have discovered it. Alara stood by the central console, transfixed by the results. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "We've got it," she whispered, almost to herself. Then louder, "We've got it." The room erupted in cheers, fatigue temporarily forgotten in the face of this breakthrough. But celebration was short-lived as the team quickly transitioned to the next phase, practical application. They knew the Zelnar would not sit idly by. The Confederacy was nothing if not thorough, and they would adapt, just as they always had. And so, humanity's finest raced against the clock, developing a countermeasure. The lab became a hive of activity, each member working in concert, like a well-oiled machine. This was human excellence, a unity of purpose that transcended the boundaries of nation, race, and creed. It was evolution in its truest form, driven by the fear of extinction and the hope of survival. Meanwhile, in the cold, calculating corridors of the Zelnar command ship, the mood was shifting. Reports of human resistance and adaptation were trickling in, each one more troubling than the last. The Zelnar, for all their advancements, had become complacent in their superiority. They had forgotten that survival often favors the desperate and that intelligence is not solely the domain of the old and powerful. Supreme Commander Zelarath, a being whose consciousness spanned centuries, watched the holographic displays of Earth with a growing unease. "How are they doing this?" he demanded, his voice a low, reverberating growl. "They are unexpected," admitted the chief scientist, a hint of reluctant admiration in his tone. "Their approach is unconventional." Zelarath glowered at the screens. Unconventional or not, they must be stopped. Deploy the next wave. Back on Earth, the team was ready. The countermeasure, a brilliant fusion of gene editing technology and nanomedicine, was set for deployment. The plan was audacious, but audacity was humanity's hallmark. They would deliver the countermeasure via the very spores that had brought the plague. Using drones and modified satellites, humanity would turn the Zelnar's own weapon against them. Alara stood with her team, gazing at the large display showing the Earth. Each glowing point of light represented a launch site ready to distribute the cure. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the task. "Remember, this isn't just about survival. It's about proving that we can overcome anything, any obstacle, any adversary. Let's show them what we're made of." With a final check, the command was given. Across the globe, drones soared into the skies, carrying humanity's salvation. The modified spores were released, invisible to the naked eye but carrying within them the tools to dismantle the plague at a genetic level. As the spores spread, the effect was nothing short of miraculous. The plague's virulence began to falter, its adaptive capabilities overwhelmed by the relentless assault of the engineered countermeasure. Reports flooded in from around the world, patients recovering, hospitals no longer overflowing, life slowly returning to normal. In the depths of space, the Zelnar watched in disbelief as their grand design unraveled. The Supreme Commander's confidence cracked, his arrogance giving way to fear. "Impossible," he muttered, as the realization dawned that they had underestimated humanity at every turn. Their biological masterpiece was being dismantled by a species they had deemed inferior. The Zelnar's failure was not just a blow to their plans of conquest, but a catastrophic misjudgment that shook the very foundations of their empire. They had believed themselves invincible, but now they faced the undeniable truth. Humanity was not to be trifled with. On Earth, the victory was palpable. Cities began to breathe again, the skies cleared, and the sun shone down on a world reborn. Humanity stood united, having faced the brink of annihilation and emerged stronger, more cohesive, and more determined than ever. Alara and her team watched the final data roll in, confirming the success of their mission. There were tears and laughter, hugs and high fives. But amidst the celebration, a stoic understanding lingered. They had won this battle, but the universe was vast, and the threats were many. Yet in that moment, basking in the glow of their triumph, humanity knew they had proven their potential, not just to the Zelnar, but to themselves. As the Zelnar retreated, tails metaphorically between their legs, one message echoed across the stars, a simple, defiant testament to human will and ingenuity. Never underestimate humanity. The aftermath was not what the universe expected. Humanity, once seen as the upstart newcomers, had not only survived but thrived, turning the tables on those who sought to annihilate them. The bioengineered plague, a weapon designed to subdue and control, had been repurposed by human ingenuity into a tool of liberation. Dr. Elise Carter stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Starbase Hope, eyes scanning the vastness of space, reflecting on the bittersweet victory. The plague, once a harbinger of doom, now carried the genetic codes of both cure and connection. A testament to human resilience and relentless drive to adapt, it had spread through the galaxy, undoing the chains of biological oppression. Nations and factions that had once watched humanity with a mix of fear and disdain now looked upon them with a kind of wary respect. The coalition that had formed to oppose the human threat had splintered, their unity shattered by the very plague they had unleashed. Elise knew that this was a hollow victory for some, particularly for those who had lost loved ones to the initial outbreaks. Colonel Marcus Steele, once a hardened skeptic of diplomacy, found himself at the forefront of new peace negotiations. He had seen the enemy, fought tooth and nail against overwhelming odds, and emerged on the other side with a newfound belief in possibility. "Turns out," he often quipped, "we're more than just stubborn apes. We're architects of our own destiny now." The galaxy itself had been irrevocably changed. Planets that had been under oppressive regimes saw new dawns, their people unshackled from centuries of genetic manipulation and subjugation. The bioengineered solution humanity had devised not only repaired the damage but also provided the genetic diversity necessary for species to thrive independently. For the survivors of Earth, the victory was both celebration and solemn remembrance. The scars remained, both visible and invisible. Yet, as Elise addressed the new intergalactic Congress, she spoke not of vengeance or superiority but of mutual survival. "We were pushed to the brink," she declared, her voice steady and determined. "And we found our strength not just in our own ingenuity, but in our capacity to change. To change ourselves and to change the world around us. The alien races who had once viewed humanity as a scourge to be eradicated now found themselves at a crossroads. Their histories were being rewritten, their understanding of power dynamics forever altered. The lessons learned were harsh but necessary. They realized that the strength of humanity lay not just in their technology or their tenacity, but in their capacity to unite when all seemed lost. As the years rolled on, humanity's mark on the galaxy became indelible. Trade routes flourished as new alliances formed. The technological advancements shared by humanity helped rebuild worlds and heal wounds. Yet, the memory of the plague was a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the thin line between creation and destruction. Dr. Carter often reflected on this as she continued her work, now focused on ensuring such a weapon could never be turned on another species again. Her legacy, like that of her species, was one of transformation. "We took what could have ended us," she mused to her students, "and we turned it into something that saves. That, my friends, is the human story." And so the galaxy moved forward, forever changed by an upstart species that had refused to bow to fate. Humanity stood as both a warning and an inspiration. In the end, it wasn't just about survival, it was about becoming something greater. Against the darkest odds, they had not just survived, but thrived, proving once and for all that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is the will to change. In the dark expanse of space, a new era dawned, with humanity at its helm, steering towards a future defined not by the past, but by what they could imagine next.